The woods are not the same anymore. When my brother and I were young, the woods were our second home. Every summer, our father would pack the old truck with tents, lanterns, and fishing rods, and we'd disappear into the wilderness for days. Those were simple times. No phones, no worries, just the crackle of firewood and the sound of insects singing us to sleep. But time doesn't stay still. We grew up, got married, built families, lived good lives, and without realizing it, we stopped going into the woods. Years later, during a family gathering at our parents' house, my older brother and I finally sat down together for the first time in ages. We laughed, reminisced, and drank like we were teenagers again. As the night went on, I got a little too drunk, and that's when I said it. Why don't we go camping again? Just for one night, like old times. My brother paused, then smiled. He agreed. That smile would haunt me later. A warning ignored. We asked our mother about our old camping gear. She led us into the basement and pulled out the dusty equipment. But her face was tense. The wilderness isn't the same anymore, she warned. There are strange people out there now. They force travelers to stay. Some never come back. We laughed it off. We told her we were grown men now, that we didn't need our father's protection anymore. That was our first mistake. The woods felt wrong. By the time we reached the forest, night was creeping in. The trails looked different. Twisted, narrower, unfamiliar. Trees felt closer together, like they were watching us pass. Still, we pressed on. Eventually, we found a clearing and set up camp. A fire burned warmly. Cold beers opened. For nearly 3 hours, we talked about life, family, and everything we'd missed. For a moment, everything felt right again. Then my brother stood up. I'm going to take a short walk, clear my head. I stayed behind, preparing food. That was the last peaceful moment of the night. The woman in the woods. While walking, my brother noticed distant campfires scattered through the trees. Old cars parked nearby. People laughing too loudly. He turned away and kept walking. After miles, he realized he'd gone too far and turned back. That's when he met her. A beautiful woman, alone, carrying a backpack. She said she was lost. Said she'd been searching for her campsite. My brother, tipsy and tired, offered to bring her back to ours. She agreed. But something was off. As they walked, she began directing him, correcting his turns, warning him when he was going the wrong way. She spoke like someone who knew the woods far too well. Then she mentioned something he had never told her. He brushed it off. Then she said she'd seen us setting up camp earlier. He ignored that too. But when she started talking about life in these woods, he finally stopped. This isn't your first time here, is it? She didn't answer. That's when he realized they weren't on the same path anymore. The trap. She asked for his phone, saying the flashlight would help. He handed it over. Minutes passed. He asked for it back to call me. She smiled. No need. We're almost there. That's when he heard male voices ahead. Fear hit him all at once. He demanded his phone back, begged to call his wife. Too late. They reached an old cabin, rotting wood, broken windows. A campfire burned outside. Around it sat several older men with distorted faces and hollow eyes. They stared at him like prey. Give us everything you've got, one said. He turned around. The woman was gone. Her voice echoed from the darkness. Get him. The escape. My brother ran. The men chased him, but he was faster. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. He abandoned the idea of finding me. He followed instinct instead. Somehow he found familiar tracks, our father's old route home. When he burst through the front door of our parents' house, I was already there, panicking, because while he was gone, I had been chased too. Men in masks, watching from the trees, closing in. I barely escaped. The aftermath. We called the police. They searched the woods. Their warning was simple. It's not safe to camp there anymore. Days later, they returned. They told our parents they'd found 2 dead bodies in the forest. No names, no explanations, no follow-up. The case quietly disappeared, and so did our love for the woods. To this day, my brother and I never speak about camping again, because whatever lives out there now is still waiting. The wrong campsite. Arthur and Helen Whitmore had been married for 47 years. They were the kind of couple people noticed in grocery stores. The way Arthur always pushed the cart while Helen walked beside him, one hand resting casually on his arm. The way they still spoke softly to each other, as if afraid of breaking something delicate. Their children were grown, their grandchildren busy with their own lives, and retirement had settled over them like a long, quiet afternoon. Camping had been their thing. They'd done it since they were young and broke. Back when Arthur's hair was dark and Helen could hike miles without her knees aching. Over the decades, the trips became shorter, easier, closer to home. But the ritual never changed. One weekend, one campsite, just them. So when spring came and the weather finally warmed, Arthur packed the old SUV with their modest gear. Tent, lanterns, sleeping bags, folding chairs, and a cooler filled with food Helen had prepared days in advance. "It's only 2 nights," she reminded him gently as he double-checked everything for the 3rd time. "I know," he said, smiling. "But you know how I get." She did. And she loved him for it. The drive. The campground sat deep within a forest preserve several hours from their town. It wasn't remote by survivalist standards, but it was far enough from civilization that phone service was unreliable. Arthur had checked the reviews online, mostly positive, with a few vague complaints about strange people and odd encounters. He dismissed those. People always exaggerated. As they drove, the road narrowed, the trees grew denser, and the sky dimmed beneath a canopy of branches. The air smelled damp and old, like soil that hadn't been disturbed in years. Helen stared out the window. "Doesn't it feel quieter than usual?" she asked. Arthur slowed slightly. "It's probably just us getting older." She smiled but didn't respond. The campsite. They arrived late afternoon. The ranger station was empty. A sign taped to the window explaining the ranger was making rounds. Arthur frowned but said nothing. Their campsite sat near the edge of a clearing, backed by thick woods. There were no neighboring tents close by, just one campsite across the clearing, empty except for an old fire pit and scattered beer cans. Helen didn't like that. "I thought you said this place was popular." "It probably is," Arthur replied, though he felt unease settle into his chest. "We might have just come during a quiet weekend." They set up camp methodically, just like they always had. Tent first, chairs next, firewood stacked neatly. By the time the fire crackled to life, the sun had dipped low enough to paint the forest in deep oranges and shadows. For a while, everything felt normal again. They cooked dinner, shared a bottle of wine, and talked about nothing important. The fire popped and hissed. Crickets began their chorus. Somewhere deep in the woods, something howled, too far away to identify. Helen shivered. Probably coyotes, Arthur said. She nodded, but moved her chair closer to him. The strangers. They arrived just after dark. Arthur noticed headlights flickering between trees before he heard the engine. An old pickup truck rolled into the empty campsite across the clearing, its muffler rattling loudly. 3 people climbed out. 2 men and a woman. They looked off. Not dangerous at first glance, just worn. The men were thin, faces hollow, eyes too sharp. The woman had long, tangled hair and a smile that lingered too long when she laughed. "Evenin'," one of the men called out cheerfully. Arthur stood, forcing a polite smile. "Evening. Didn't expect to see anyone else out here," the woman said as she approached, hands stuffed into her jacket pockets. Helen felt her stomach tighten. "We don't get many folks our age camping anymore," the second man added, grinning. Arthur laughed awkwardly. "Guess we're stubborn." They introduced themselves, names Arthur forgot almost immediately. Their voices were friendly, but their eyes never stopped moving, watching, measuring. The woman's gaze lingered on Helen. "You 2 alone out here?" she asked. Arthur nodded. "Just the weekend." "Well, if you need anything," the first man said, "we're right over there." They lingered longer than necessary, asking questions, where they were from, how long they'd been married, whether the SUV was reliable. Helen answered minimally. Finally, Arthur excused them. As the strangers walked back to their campsite, Helen leaned in. "I don't like them," Arthur sighed. "I know, but we'll be fine. We'll keep to ourselves." He didn't mention the way the woman had glanced at their car keys hanging from his belt. The first night, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The crack of branches, the distant laughter from the other campsite, footsteps crunching leaves far too close. At one point, Helen whispered, "Arthur, are they outside?" He held his breath, listening. Silence. "Just animals," he said, though he wasn't sure. When morning finally came, they both looked exhausted. False friendliness. The next day passed slowly. The strangers waved when they crossed paths, even shared coffee with them mid-morning. Arthur noticed how easily they slipped into conversation, how quickly they laughed, almost rehearsed. "You folks headed out tomorrow?" one of the men asked casually. "Yes," Arthur replied. "Early." "Shame," the woman said. "Not many good people left these days." That sentence stuck with Helen. By afternoon, the air felt heavy. The woods seemed too still. No birds, no wind. Helen suggested packing up early. "We can leave tonight," she said quietly. Arthur hesitated. Pride warred with instinct. "Let's just stay alert," he replied. The attempt. It happened after sunset. Arthur had walked a short distance away to use the restroom facility, a small concrete structure near the trailhead. When he returned, his heart nearly stopped. Helen wasn't by the fire. Their chairs were overturned. The lantern lay smashed on the ground. "Helen?" he shouted. Movement. The woman from earlier stepped out of the shadows, gripping Helen's arm. One of the men stood behind her. "Easy now," the woman said calmly. "No need to get upset." Arthur rushed forward, but the second man appeared, blocking his path. "She's coming with us," he said. "And you're giving us the keys." Helen struggled, eyes wide with terror. Arthur felt something snap inside him. He charged. The man slammed into him, knocking the wind from his lungs. Arthur fell hard, pain exploding through his ribs. "Arthur!" Helen screamed. The woman tightened her grip. That's when headlights flared. Another vehicle, unknown, passed on the distant road, briefly illuminating the clearing. The men froze. Arthur didn't waste the moment. He lunged again, grabbing a burning log from the fire and swinging wildly. The man shouted, backing away. Helen broke free and ran. Arthur grabbed her hand and didn't stop running. They crashed through brush, thorns tearing at skin, lungs burning. Behind them, voices shouted but didn't follow far. Eventually, they reached the road. Arthur flagged down the next car. Aftermath. Police returned with them an hour later. The campsite across the clearing was empty. No truck, no people, no evidence except tire tracks and disturbed soil. The officer's expression was grim. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said quietly. Arthur and Helen never camped again. Sometimes, Helen still wakes up screaming. And sometimes, Arthur swears he hears laughter drifting through the trees when the wind is just right. She came back with the storm. I hadn't been divorced very long when I made the mistake of thinking solitude meant loneliness. There's a difference between the two, but when you're alone long enough, your brain starts lying to you. Tells you that silence is a problem, that empty nights need filling, that anyone is better than no one. That's how I ended up asking her to go camping with me. Her name was Mara. We met through a mutual friend at a small bar on the edge of town. One of those places with dim lights and cracked leather booths where people went to forget instead of celebrate. She had a quiet confidence about her, the kind that made you lean in when she spoke. Dark hair, pale eyes, a laugh that came suddenly, like it surprised even her. She knew I'd just gone through a divorce. I knew she didn't like talking about her past. That should have been enough warning. When I mentioned I was planning a short camping trip, 2 nights, nothing extreme, she smiled and said, "I haven't been camping in a long time." Something in the way she said it felt weighted. Still, I asked her if she wanted to come. She didn't hesitate. The weather turned against us. The forecast changed the morning we left. Thunderstorms, heavy rain, flash flooding warnings. I called her to cancel. She told me not to. "I like storms," she said. "They make things honest." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't ask. By the time we reached the forest, the sky was already bruised purple and black. The trees bent and creaked in the wind. Rain came down in sheets so thick it blurred the road. The campground was nearly empty. One ranger vehicle sat near the entrance, but the station itself was closed. I remember thinking it was strange, but relief drowned out concern. Fewer people meant quieter nights, or so I thought. We picked a site deep in the trees, far from the road. The rain soaked everything within minutes. My boots squelched with every step. Thunder rolled constantly. Not sharp cracks, but deep, endless growls that vibrated in my chest. Mara stood there watching the forest while I struggled with the tent. "She's loud tonight," she said. "Who?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "The sky. The first night. The rain never stopped. It hammered the tent like fists. Water pooled beneath us despite the tarp. Every flash of lightning turned the trees into skeletal silhouettes. We drank cheap whiskey to keep warm. It loosened her tongue. She started telling me stories. Not funny ones. Not casual ones. She talked about growing up in places that didn't exist on maps. about men who taught her how to stay quiet, about nights spent hiding in basements while people argued above her. Her voice stayed calm as she spoke, but her eyes never blinked. "Do you believe people can disappear without dying?" she asked suddenly. I shrugged. "I guess. People run away." She shook her head slowly. "I don't mean run. I mean erased." A thunderclap split the sky so violently the ground seemed to jump. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just storm talk, trauma mixed with alcohol and bad weather. But as the night went on, her stories got darker. She spoke about men who wore masks, about debts, about promises that followed you no matter how far you went. At some point, I asked her gently to stop. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "I forget not everyone needs to remember the disappearance." I woke up alone. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle, but the forest still felt wrong. Too quiet after the storm. The tent flap was open. Cold air rushed in. "Mara," I called. No answer. Her sleeping bag was gone. So was her backpack. At first, I assumed she'd gone to the restroom or for a walk. But minutes passed. Then more. Something tugged at my chest. I stepped outside. That's when I saw the footprints. They led away from the campsite and then stopped. No return path. No signs of struggle. Just gone. My phone had no signal. I waited. Hours passed. The rain returned harder than before. Just as panic began to fully set in, headlights appeared between the trees. A truck. It pulled into the clearing slowly, tires crunching wet gravel. Two men stepped out, and between them was Mara, the men from her past. She looked different. Her posture had changed. Her eyes were sharper, more awake. "These are my friends," she said casually. "I told you about them." She hadn't. The men smiled, but their eyes didn't match. One was tall and thin, his face scarred and uneven. The other was heavier, broad shoulders, hands that never stopped clenching. "We've been looking for her," the tall one said. "She's hard to keep track of." Mara laughed softly. "I told you they'd find me eventually." My stomach dropped. I asked what they wanted. The heavy man glanced at my car, at the tent, at my gear. "Everything," he said. I backed up slowly. Mara tilted her head. "Don't make this difficult. You were kind to me." Thunder cracked overhead. I ran. The escape. I don't remember thinking. My body just moved. I dove into the driver's seat, keys already in hand, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd black out. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Hands slammed against the windows. Someone shouted. I hit the gas. The road was a nightmare. Mud, fallen branches, rain blinding me, lightning flashing so often it felt like daylight. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I drove straight to the police station. The arrest. They found her that night. And one of the men. The other vanished. Mara didn't resist arrest. She smiled when she saw me across the station. Later, an officer told me the truth. She had a history, luring men, leading them into situations where others waited. Sometimes they were robbed. Sometimes worse. The missing man? They never found him. After. I still hear thunder differently now. It doesn't sound natural anymore. It sounds like a warning. And every time rain hits my windows at night, I wonder if she ever really left the storm. The campsite I should never have bought. I bought the campsite because I loved the woods. That probably sounds simple, maybe even harmless, but the truth is, I love the woods more than people. Trees didn't ask questions. Forests didn't judge you for leaving, disappearing, or choosing solitude over conversation. 3 years ago, when my job sent me overseas, I used my savings to buy a small, privately owned campsite tucked deep inside a forest preserve. It wasn't much, just a cleared patch of land, an old fire ring, and a narrow dirt access road, but it was mine. A place I could return to whenever life slowed down. Except life never did. For 3 years I kept postponing the trip. Another country, another contract, another excuse, until one day, I looked at the listing photos again and realized something uncomfortable. I was afraid to go, so I booked time off, packed my car, and drove out alone, determined not to let fear make decisions for me anymore. I wish I had listened to it instead. The road in. The forest swallowed the road long before I reached my campsite. The pavement turned to gravel, then dirt, then something barely recognizable as a road at all. Branches scraped the sides of my car. The sky darkened even though it was still early afternoon. Rain began as a drizzle. By the time I reached the wooden sign marking my property line, my name carved into it, the rain had turned heavy, soaking, relentless. I remember feeling proud. "This is it?" I said out loud, as if the trees needed confirmation. The woods didn't respond. They never do. My campsite. The campsite looked different than the photos. Not drastically, just enough to unsettle me. The clearing felt smaller. The trees closer. The fire ring rusted and partially collapsed. Leaves filled the ground unnaturally deep, as if no one had disturbed the land in years, which didn't make sense. I owned this place. I parked my car, stepped out, and immediately felt it. That pressure in my ears, like altitude sickness. The forest was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. No birds, no insects, just rain. I told myself it was weather-related. I always told myself things like that. Setting up camp. The rain made everything harder. My tent fought me like it didn't want to exist there. Poles slipped. Stakes refused to hold. My fingers went numb from the cold. At one point, I laughed out loud. Too loud, too sharp, just to hear something human. The sound died quickly, swallowed by the woods. I finally got the tent up and moved my gear inside. By then, it was nearly dark. The forest shifted into shades of black and gray, the rain blurring everything beyond a few feet. That's when I heard the first sound. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Somewhere beyond the tree line. I froze, heart hammering. "Hello," I called. Nothing answered. I told myself it was an animal. But animals don't walk like that. The first night begins. Night came fast. Rain hammered the tent so hard it felt alive. Like fingers tapping, nails scraping. Thunder rolled constantly. Not sharp cracks but long, deep growls that vibrated in my bones. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the feeling that the space around me was crowded. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Closer now. They circled the tent slowly. Not pacing. Not rushing. Walking. I held my breath, counting seconds between each step. 1, 2, 3. Then they stopped. Right outside the tent. I reached for my flashlight, hands shaking, and flicked it on. Nothing. Just rain and darkness. When I turned the light off, something brushed the side of the tent. I screamed. The sounds of the woods. After that, the woods came alive. Whispers just at the edge of hearing. Voices layered over one another, impossible to understand but unmistakably human. Something laughed. Not loudly, not clearly, like someone remembering a joke alone. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, telling myself this was stress, fatigue, imagination amplified by fear. Then I heard my name, spoken softly, from behind the tent. I did not answer. The rain makes it worse. The rain intensified. Water seeped under the tent, soaking my clothes, my sleeping bag, my skin. Cold settled into my bones. Every lightning flash revealed shadows moving where shadows shouldn't move. At one point, I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the fire ring. Tall, still, watching. Thunder roared, and when the light faded, it was gone. I don't know how long I stayed like that, curled up, whispering prayers I didn't believe in. But at some point, exhaustion won. I dreamed I was standing in the clearing. The rain had stopped. The woods were dry, wrong, empty. Footprints covered the ground, all leading to my tent, all facing inward. Then something whispered behind me, "You shouldn't have come back." I woke up screaming, surviving until morning. The longest part wasn't the fear. It was waiting, waiting for morning, waiting for light, waiting for the woods to loosen their grip. The footsteps continued all night, sometimes running, sometimes crawling, sometimes right beside my head. Once something pressed down on the tent roof, hard enough to bend the poles. I thought it would tear through. Didn't. Just before dawn, everything stopped. No footsteps, no whispers, no rain, silence, morning. I unzipped the tent slowly, bracing myself. The clearing looked normal, too normal. No footprints, no damage, no signs of anything unusual, except the fire ring. It had been rearranged. Stones stacked neatly, like a symbol I didn't recognize. That's when I knew. The woods hadn't been imagining me. I had been noticed. Leaving. I didn't pack properly. I threw wet gear into my car, hands shaking, eyes darting to the tree line every few seconds. As I turned the key, I swear I heard something sigh, deep and disappointed. The drive out felt longer than the drive in. The forest didn't release me easily. After, I sold the campsite online 2 weeks later. Priced low. No questions asked. It sold within hours. Sometimes, late at night, when rain hits my windows just right, I hear footsteps outside my apartment, and I wonder if the woods ever really let me leave.